Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on the Early Intervention Provider Handbook. On behalf of the EITP, the Early Intervention Training Program, we're glad you're joining us today. Our speaker today is Shauna Ruzick. She is a consultant with the EI Training Program, also has a few other things going on in her life, as you can see there. Shauna will be introducing herself here in just a moment. For facilitators today, Susan Connor, who is our program director at the Early Intervention Training Program at the University of Illinois, is on board here to help if there's anything we need clarified. I am Maria Maddox, also, as you can see, so you have some faces to names. Again, that's always helpful. Thank you so much, discussion board. So with that being said, I am going to turn the microphone over to Shauna, and she will start. Shauna?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Maria?
Yes.
Okay, so let's get started. So with the learning objectives, and after you hear today's presentation, we hope that you'll understand the background for the changes to the Provider Handbook.
Shauna?
You'll be able to reference clarifications and identify new additions and changes, and you'll be able to review and implement changes.
Shauna, I'm going to interrupt you already for a second. We're getting some notice that folks would like for you to be a little louder, so if you would make your microphone just a little bit louder.
Maria, can you, I have a pause here in the slides.
Oh. You want to go ahead and try speaking again? Okay, it appears that our speaker is having just a little bit of difficulty with her microphone, so we will go ahead and move forward with the presentation. So why did we have the new Provider Handbook come out? As you can see, the last one that we had was updated in 2009, so it's been a while, time to update it. We've also seen some changes in the law and the Rule 500, and it looks like Shauna is back on, so I'm going to let her step in again. So, Shauna?
Am I live now?
You are. You're good.
Okay, so sorry about that, guys. So why the new Provider Handbook? So as Maria stated, it was, first of all, it was last updated in 2009. But when the regulations were changed, which is one of the big reasons we needed to update this, there were things that Illinois had to change to align with federal legislation. Specifically, those included family assessment, insurance changes, and transition changes. It's sort of old news, but this handbook has not been revised since those changes became effective. And then also over the years, there's been several changes in policy and procedure, and we're getting them in writing now. I just want you guys to take a deep breath, because this is truly a compilation of changes that have been implemented with a few new updates to policy and procedure, and it really shouldn't be overwhelming to you. The new handbook is a means to clear up any confusion, but it's not an end-all be-all. There may still be questions, but you'll have a tool to help you more than ever before. This handbook is your guide and should be observed as a tool and a resource for you and serve for clarification. We can move ahead.
Shauna, this is Susan. We are getting comments from people that it is still difficult to hear you, and some
Maria,
people
can
have
you move
the
ahead,
volume.
please?
Shauna, are you able to turn your volume up a little or talk a little closer to your computer?
So I wanted to stress the team effort that really occurred in the revision of this handbook. It consisted of a variety of stakeholders, including EI providers of all disciplines, child and family connections, managers, service coordinators, ICE members, the EI Ombudsman, the EI Central Billing Office, EI Provider Connections, the training program, the monitoring program, and Bureau staff. So it was really a collective effort in making changes and decisions. So the implementation and the updates. So the revised handbook should be well known to all EI providers and will be used to ensure compliance during monitoring visits effective February 1st, 2017. We encourage you to review the handbook and become familiar with it as quickly as possible. You may start using any of the clarified practices immediately, but know that the deadline for full implementation will be February 1st, 2017. So how to use the revised handbook. You want to make sure that you're aware of the content, know your responsibility as an EI provider, utilize this as a resource and a basic guide, and really, unlike before, there are so many different examples, rich examples specific to guide you within your practice. We're not going to cover every detail in all of the sections of the handbook, but we are going to highlight sections of the handbook that are important to discuss. So the table of contents outlines the specific organization of the handbook, referencing each section. And the intent of the handbook, again, is to provide clarifications on policies and procedures, to reference changes, provide resources and examples, and really to be a comprehensive tool and guide for you as a provider. So the principles of early intervention. You continue to hear about them throughout each and every professional development opportunity and as you participate in evaluations, assessments, and IFSP meetings. I'd like to spend a minute or two talking about why these are so important. Our goal in early intervention is to support the competence and confidence of families and caregivers in supporting children's development. We are there to coach, consult, and collaborate, and to build on the strengths of the child and their family, caregivers, and community. You'll notice on the slide some key words with particular focus on supporting families, functional and measurable goals incorporated into the daily routine. And we want to definitely, stress the importance of how the principles play into our practice each and every day. The role of the early intervention. Yes. One of the strengths of this newly revised handbook is that the principles and focus of early intervention is front and center. The EI principles drive our practice and should not be taken lightly. So take some time to read and reflect how you embed the principles into your practice. We empower the family to help their child succeed in their natural environment through day-to-day activities and routine. We as providers come into early intervention with different backgrounds, education, and experience. With those of you on the webinar today, I know that we all have varying levels of experience and time as an EI provider, but I'd like to preface further discussion that where change is sometimes difficult, it often results in improvement. If you've been around long enough, you have seen many changes, but as a system, we are continuing to move ahead on the path to best practice. At the end of the day, we all have the same mission, to help support children and their families. So I charge all of us to embrace our roles, to be open-minded and realize the power and the influence we have on young children and their families. With this mindset, we are early interventionists, leading the way for high-quality, evidence-based practice and functional outcomes that are meaningful to families to assist their children each and every day. So the DEC Recommended Practices. The Bureau adheres and supports the implementation of DEC Recommended Practices in early intervention and early childhood special education. And Illinois has really, truly been in the forefront with our own principles that align with the DEC Recommended Practices. The Recommended Practices are an initiative that bridge the gap between research and practice. They were developed in 1991 and were recently revised to provide guidance to the field for early intervention and early childhood special education. They provide guidance to practitioners and families about the most effective ways to promote development for children with delays. So as you can see, we have several different trainings available within early intervention. And I can imagine the varying levels of experience in the providers listening today. For me, I've been a provider for nearly 17 years, and along the way, I have learned so much and only wish I had an opportunity to attend such invaluable trainings earlier in my career. I encourage you to attend the Institute no matter how long you've been a provider, and I guarantee you'll find much insight and increased understanding of our guiding principles from theory to practice. So be sure to visit their website. So Chapter 2 touches on laws and regulations, and this is important to be familiar with and understand the varying entities pertaining to our practice within EI and discipline-specific licensure acts. So be sure to check out this chapter as it provides resources for federal and state information. Okay, in terms of monitoring reviews, this is also in Chapter 2, and you'll find more information in terms of how monitoring is scheduled, triggered, some administrative directives that really touches on making sure that you have ongoing professional development, documented liability insurance, and then your documentation of your support services that you have billed to CBO. There's more specifics again on monitoring, but the purpose of monitoring is to assist CSD offices as well as credential providers and to ensure appropriate service delivery. Monitoring is also supportive of families and CSD offices and providers in addressing issues and resolving conflicts, and to safeguard the rights of families to receive appropriate services by investigating parent complaints regarding the appropriate billing of services. If you have not participated in monitoring yet, it would be a great chapter for you to review and become acquainted with the process. So in terms of our EI partners, these are definitely different places that you want to visit and be familiar and have access to. So CSD offices, GHS, the Early Intervention Central Billing Office, the Clearinghouse, the Monitoring Program, Provider Connections, and the Training Program all have invaluable information and resources available to you. So whether you're working as an independent provider or working with a company or an agency, you as an individual should be familiar with the partners in EI and how important it is to remain informed, keeping in the know, and having these resources at your fingertips. not only for you, but also for the family and the child. So I want to draw attention just briefly on the Clearinghouse website, or within the handbook, I should say. The phone number is incorrect, but it will be corrected in a later release of the handbook. And also, as a provider, if you have not enrolled in Impact, you should be reviewing the information that is available on the Provider Connections website. So touching base on monitoring again. So when you are selected to be monitored, files are randomly pulled and you will be notified by phone and receive a letter of the files to be reviewed. This may not be an annual review, and there are circumstances that may trigger an annual review just because there are so many providers and it's not possible to monitor every single provider yearly. But if you have a corrective action plan, you may end up being monitored on an annual basis. Those that do not, it may be every other year. And other reasons that you could be monitored again every year would be that you may see a large number of children, you may receive a large amount of active authorizations, and so and also if your corrective action plan has significant findings, that could also trigger a repeat review. And just be aware that there are refunds requested for any violations due to noncompliance. And then a few tips to consider and be very aware of when you're being monitored is, monitoring has noted lack of or less attendance at IFSP meetings, so they will be looking at initials, annuals, exits to make sure that the providers are attending and there was provider input. And also just make sure that you are reviewing your authorization information. They will be looking at that and ensuring that you're receiving the appropriate type of authorization, especially with the evaluation assessment off and the assessment off, since that has changed. Just a few tips to keep in mind. I wanted to provide some clarification for prescriptions. There's a note for DTH and DTBs that there's a prescription required, but that is incorrect. There is not a prescription required for developmental therapists, DTHs, or DTBs. Okay, so Chapter 3, we'll move ahead. This chapter just it pulls together and organizes information. Different memos have gone out over the years and different updates and things like that. So they're definitely included. It's very comprehensive, and I just wanted to make note of that there's so much information in this new handbook that did not exist before. So Chapter 3 also has the Provider Agreement. The Provider Agreement, as you know, outlines your responsibilities as an EI provider. Within the Provider Agreement, there are expectations of adherence to the principles of early intervention and recommended practices. And this is a really important document. Oftentimes we sign things and file them, so we encourage you to perhaps pull that out and review it again if you haven't done that in some time. So provider credentialing and enrollment. Most of you are likely already in the system as a credentialed enrolled provider. However, Chapter 3 outlines the process and some tips are provided. It's particularly helpful as you prepare for your renewal. And something that has changed most recently is the impact enrollment. So you need to be aware of anything that you may need to do with impact if you haven't already enrolled, and then in terms of the process and what's required for renewal. All of that information is available on Provider Connections for you. So again, in Chapter 3, we have the use of associate level providers. So this section clarifies who are associate level providers and the responsibilities of the supervisor as well as the supervisee. You definitely want to review this chapter and understand your responsibilities. A few highlights include how much supervision is required, supervision time at each session, required documentation. So you should really know that whether you are the supervisor or the supervisee. I wanted to bring this to your attention, a change to the language for the speech-language pathologist in the clinical fellowship year. So a clinical fellow must abide by rules and regulations of the Speech-Language Practice Act as well as those designated by early intervention. There has not been clear guidance on this in the past. A CF will continue to be credentialed as an SLP assistant. However, a CF may independently conduct the assessments, except the initial, and attend and participate in the IFSP meeting. So that is independently without the supervisor, which I know there's been a lot of confusion in the past over that. CFCs will be notified by DHS to ensure that there's a mutual understanding, as will it will be clarified in the further revisions to the handbook. Something new to the handbook is the use of students and having them, in early intervention. There hasn't been anything in the past. Right now, we have some guidance in the handbook for the use of developmental therapy students, and it provides it outlines confidentiality, liability, direct supervision by the supervising credentialed provider, documentation, and co-signing. So if you're working with a student, please ensure that you review this section of the handbook. And right now it only is in there for developmental therapy students, but rest assured procedures are underway for students within other disciplines. So Chapter 3 also includes information and clarifications on provisional providers, credential enrollment inactivation, confidentiality, internet and use of SBACs or EFACs, liability insurance, mandated reporting, evaluation assessment activities. So you definitely want to check all of that out. Speaking of mandated reporting, as an EI provider, we are mandated reporters of child abuse and neglect. It is not our job to determine whether abuse or neglect has truly occurred. The reporter only needs reasonable cause to believe that there was an abuse or neglect. And so you are the one that needs to call. So whether you are consulting with your employer or the service coordinator, if you suspect it, you have to make the call. And you see that abuse hotline is available 24/7, and that would be contacting DCFS. So evaluation assessment activities. The purpose of the family-directed assessment is to support the family and enhance the family's capacity to meet the developmental needs of the child based on their functional outcomes. This involves the routine-based interview and the ages and stages questionnaire that the family gives permission to complete. The service coordinator is the one that completes these at the intake, and the results or the pertinent information is captured on the intake social history summary sheet. And as a provider and as an initial evaluator, you should be receiving that summary form when you receive information about a child. If you aren't getting it, we encourage you to request it. So provider selection is highlighted, and just to basically, families are offered a choice of 3 to 5 providers, and they have to bear in mind providers that are enrolled within the family's specific insurance, or if there's other payer restrictions. And we encourage you to also look at the CFC procedure manual, Chapter 3, for more information on that. In terms of authorizations, this is important. Authorization is required for payment. They should be issued and in hand before providing services. Cannot stress that enough. Otherwise, it could result in non-payment. You also want to check the accuracy of your authorization, name of provider, service and frequency, and understand the different types of authorizations that you receive and the place of service, so that you can bill appropriately. So that there's a couple of updates, and in the glossary you can find more about the definitions of the EA auth is utilized when determining eligibility. The AS auth when the child is already eligible and the focus is on gathering assessment information. Another note is that the associate level provider should be listed in the comment field. And I want to draw attention to the sample authorization that you'll find in attachment number 10. So please take a look at those. So initial evaluations and assessment. So these are definitely to determine eligibility, develop an initial IFSP, or could be adding to the existing IFSP if it's an assessment. If you are providing an initial evaluation, you must be a credentialed initial evaluator. It's important to make sure that you are utilizing an approved tool for the discipline that you are credentialed in and the domain that you are assessing. So you want to be very familiar with those domain levels. So service delivery should always occur in the natural environment, and that is, it could be their home, but it could be the daycare. It's where they spend the majority of their time. And there's, again, more specifics in relation to natural environment and looking at, because it is the law and we need to provide services within natural environment. You want to make sure that you're adhering to your authorized frequency and intensity and location of services. And I want to bring attention to, team communication. It's imperative that we have team communication, and the team communication is those team members that are listed on the IFSP. That is the family, the service coordinator, the providers. It could be daycare providers, and teaming plays a critical role in the child's development. Lastly, I would like to mention and stress, when discontinuing services, it is imperative to remember that the EI provider must provide 30 days prior written notice to the service coordinator and the family when discontinuing services for an eligible child. I'm going to hand it over to you now, Maria.
Okay. Thanks. I'm just going to step in and talk to the clarifications about transition. There's some language clarifications that are in the new handbook that, well, let me turn my mic up here. Here we go. Is that better? Great, thank you. Okay, so some clarification in the language in the book. One of the first things that we want to make sure is that there's language about that there needs to be a transition plan written into the IFSP. The plan needs to be written in that IFSP that falls somewhere between 2.3 and 2.9. So there should be a 6-month or an annual review somewhere in there. This is a plan that is, it's an outcome. It's a transition outcome that has some specific strategies that need to be at minimally addressed, steps that are going to be taken as the child exits the EI program, any transition services that are needed, anything else, any other strategies that are needed related to transition. But there should be definitely an outcome in that period developed as part of the IFSP in that period of time. And because it is at an IFSP meeting, the entire team needs to be present. In addition, there's language that clarifies the transition planning conference. Now that is a meeting, but it's not an IFSP meeting in the sense that the entire team has to be there, but there are some specific people that do have to be present. One being the representative from the Part B special education, and depending on where you are, that could be a different person, but somebody from Part B, parents obviously, the service coordinator, and a person or persons who is directly involved in conducting evaluations and assessments. Someone that can be there, that is on the team, that can interpret the results of the evaluations so that if the rest of the members of that meeting have questions about the child's development and just clarifying some concerns. So at this meeting, there are very specific tasks that do have to take place, and they're tasks that are better managed by the Part B rep. So to make sure that all of these individuals are present at this meeting is really very important. But some of those tasks include providing information about Part B and other services that occur in that child's area for 3 and above, explaining the difference in Part B eligibility and how they differ from early intervention eligibility. Also the timelines that take place in that district for evaluation activities, domain reviews, eligibility determinations, IEP meetings, and then also discussing special education and other related services as they relate to an IEP. So these are specific tasks that need to take place. Now, this meeting can be combined with other meetings, so it can be combined with this IFSP meeting that falls somewhere between 2.3 and 2.9. It can be combined with an exit IFSP meeting. It can be combined with a meeting that the school might be having. But if it's combined, you need to make sure that both meetings take place and that the people who are supposed to be at those meetings are present. That, I believe, is the gist of that part. So, Shauna?
Okay, I'm back.
Shauna or Maria, I'm sorry, did you want to, Karen just posted a question about in the event that someone cannot be present. Do you want to respond to that question now before we move on?
Sure, I can do that. So, Shauna, you want to turn your mic off so I don't have feedback? So, ideally, as in any meeting, it's best to have the participants present, but they can be participating by phone, or at last resort, there can be additional information that an evaluator can provide based on the questions that may come up. The problem is you don't know what questions may come up, so that's why it's beneficial to at least have somebody present via phone, like we do any other type of meeting. Hopefully that helps. And I'm seeing another question, are school districts aware that reps should be there? Yes, they are. How your area works that out is something that should be developed at your LIC, the transition agreements between Part B and Part C. And there's a whole lot of other information. I'm going to tell you that I don't want to get into too many more specifics. Put these questions in the discussion board. I'll try to answer on chat. But also there's some other trainings out there where we discuss this in detail, specific to building bridges, transition planning, transition training that we have. So I'll try to cover what I can in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, guys, we're going to talk about some additional clarifications. So for the evaluation and assessment, providers have an authorization for 14 days from the date of the request to do the evaluation and assessment, and you must complete your evaluation and assessment and the written report within the 14 days. Now, if there is some delay in doing the evaluation or the assessment, such as an illness, a family request, things happen, we want to make sure that you document this issue and that you contact the service coordinator to inform the coordinator that this has occurred and you may or may not need a new authorization at that point, but it's important that this is being documented because, and monitoring will be also looking at this to ensure that this 14-day time frame is being met. So if this occurs and you're at the end of that 14-day period, be sure to contact the coordinator, and at that point you would be getting, it would be 4 business days from that date due to that delay. So just be sure to look at the language that is indicated within the section 311. And I also want to bring attention that there are new report formats in the attachments. We've been utilizing the evaluation assessment format, but there are now 6-month and discharge assessment or summary formats in the attachments. So again, just bringing attention to more trainings that are available. There are more specific, topic-specific trainings to assist you in clarifying, enhancing your knowledge in particular areas. As you note on the slide, there's definitely training on the report formats, mandated reporting, and other specific trainings that you may be interested in attending. And if you have further questions on eligibility, it's also a good idea to attend the overview of eligibility in Illinois EI. There's some online as well as face-to-face trainings available.
Shauna, it seems like there's a couple questions that we want to address before we move forward. So I'll address a few things before we move on to the next section. Okay, so one of the questions or one of the clarifications was asked about in section 3.6, which is around confidentiality. And the statement is a note under that section. And it says, unless specifically stated in the IFSP, a parent's signature does not authorize EI providers to talk to each other about the child. So specific parental consent is required. In the IFSP, section 7, the implementation page, it's the page that everybody probably thinks of as what the family signs at the meeting. That page has been updated to include some language So if you have the chance, go to the Section 7 of the IFSP. It is included in the handbook. And it says that I consent to the verbal and written exchange of information between members of the IFSP team. So what that statement is really saying in Section 3.6 is if the family hasn't signed the IFSP with that specific information in Section 7, then you would need to have specific consent to talk to others, to share information verbally or written. But with the revision of Section 7, it is included, and it is one of the things that the family is agreeing to when they sign. So I hope that that helps to clarify. One of the questions is around, can you talk to a DCFS worker if they are listed on the IFSP? And one of the roles of the service coordinator in our system is to really be the bridge with the DCFS caseworker. So talking with the DCFS caseworker is not a billable service under IFSP development time for providers. It's one of the roles that the service coordinator does play, is sort of bridging that gap between the two. There may be times that a DCFS caseworker reaches out to you, but it is really the role of the service coordinator to handle that piece of communication. There was another question that I wanted to address. One of them was around the difference between evaluation and assessment off and what that really means. I think I saw someone else providing some information that, yes, it's not about the rates. It's really about the EA off, the evaluation off, are when you're determining eligibility for the system. And that could be at initial eligibility determination, or it could be at annual eligibility determination, versus assessment is really, again, at initial or at annual when we know that the child is eligible. We don't need to concern ourselves with the eligibility determination piece. We just need to move on to kind of determine strengths, needs, how the child is functioning in his or her daily routines. The important thing for you to know is that you really need to be checking your offs when you get them from the service coordinators and ensure that your offs align with what you are being asked to do, and then your billing aligns with that. So there are no differences in rates. I think that was one of the questions. And there was one more that I thought we could answer here. Sorry, I just lost it. Oh, one of the questions was about the section where we talked about evaluation assessments providers and how service coordinators work with the family to choose a provider that best meets their needs. The question was around how are the 3 to 5 providers presented to the family. And again, as the Provider Handbook says and as the CFC procedure manual says, service coordinators are presenting possible providers to families based on a number of different things, one of which is expertise in terms of matching the provider's expertise to what the family's and child's needs are. Another is availability or service area. And so they'll kind of work through, you know, they'll look at who is available, and then they'll present to the family, these are the folks that are really available in your area. How can I help you, you know, choose the person that best meets your needs? Service coordinators have shared that a lot of times families don't know the individual differences between the providers, so it's one of the things that the service coordinator does help the families to be able to choose. Each CFC has a slightly different mechanism for doing that. Some CFCs have a binder or a book that they share. Some CFCs have it in more of an electronic format. So that piece of it is done a little differently from CFC to CFC. Okay, so I think there may be a few other questions that we can clarify, but I think we can go ahead and move on to the next section.
Yes, I just want to let folks know, please keep typing your questions in, but also if you can, visit the forum and put your questions in there. We will make sure that the questions that are presented in here do make it to the discussion forum. and we'll do our best to address what we can via chat as well. So just keep asking the questions that you have. Thank you. Shauna?
Okay, so next we're going to talk about Chapter 4, and that is the family rights and expectations. So this section includes a summary of the family rights, the process for dispute resolution, system expectations for families who choose to participate in the EI program, and the family outcome survey information. So we encourage you to visit each section of that. But do you know the rights of the families? It's important for providers to know the rights of the families, and this may come into play when you contact a daycare provider and you don't have consent to speak to them and would need to get the family's written consent. This also pertains to HIPAA and confidentiality. Another thing that was mentioned earlier is the 30-day notice to families. It's their right to have this notice, and the service coordinator as well as the family should be notified, and you would want to provide the service coordinator that notice in writing. Of course, you would be communicating along the way, but you have to provide that 30-day written notice.
Shauna, I'm not sure if you're trying to talk, but I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, yes. I am trying to talk. Hopefully you can hear me now. So the summary of rights, you should just look at Chapter 4 and be very familiar, but some of the components are the informed consent, that the consent must be received from the parent to receive EI services. The parent also signs the IFSP document, as Susan indicated, understanding the services, and consent to share information about their child with other providers. And that permission now allows for providers on the IFSP team to be communicating without getting additional consent. The prior written notice must be given to the parent before a provider makes a change, or a change is made, I should say, within the child's IFSP, and should receive written notice of meetings. And then the review of records. The parents have the right to review their records at any time. And we also want to make sure that we're maintaining confidentiality of records. So in terms of trainings, you want to make sure that you look at the training calendar. There is the impact of EI on families. Family outcome survey is an online training. And there's a new handbook that the service coordinators are providing in terms of the family rights. State of Illinois Infant, Toddler, and Family Rights under IDEA for the EI system. That's available on the EI Early Intervention Clearinghouse. So the IFSP, yes.
I'm sorry, there's a question here about the resolution of concerns from Chapter 4, so I'll just respond here if you want to turn off your talk button for a second.
Okay, sure.
So there's a question about the resolution of concerns, and this is a question that we received. I received it via email, and it was also put onto the discussion board, so I'll just comment on it here. It is the responsibility of both providers and service coordinators. It's really all of our responsibilities to ensure that families understand their rights, and that their rights and their safeguards are really upheld. Service coordinators do have the responsibility of providing a copy of these rights at multiple points along the early intervention process for families. The handbook, though, does say in 4.2 that it is the responsibility of the provider as well to make sure that the family's rights are upheld. This does not mean that you need to provide every one of your families with one of those family rights booklets, but it does mean that you need to make sure that you understand what's in the booklets, and that when families have questions, that you have a copy of it with you that you can either share with them or you have it available to you online. The rights booklet is available through our Child Find materials. You can place an order for Child Find materials to get some of those mailed to you, but it's also available electronically. And one of the easiest ways to find it is to go to the Early Intervention Clearinghouse website, and it's available in a printable format or for viewing purposes. So I hope that helps to answer. Thanks, Shauna.
Okay, thank you. So the next chapter, Chapter 5, is talking about the IFSP. And there's a lot of information here, and this slide highlights the IFSP components, the description, the timelines, the provider's role, the outcomes. There's developmental justification of need, IFSP development activities, and then IFSP development time. So the initial IFSP for eligible children must be developed within 45 days of their referral to the EI system. The IFSP is reviewed every 6 months or more frequently if requested by the family. The new IFSP is developed on an annual basis, and a transition plan is to be included in the IFSP no fewer than 90 days before the child's 3rd birthday. And I know Maria gave a lot of details about the transition. So in terms of the provider's role, it is the expectation, and it is extremely important for providers to attend and be active and in full participation within the IFSP meeting. We as providers play an integral role in the development of the family's IFSP. So we want to develop a quality IFSP, and we want providers to have their evaluation and assessment and progress reports to the service coordinator prior to the IFSP meeting. The IFSP meeting includes the parent, the parents, or the caregivers, or the other family members as requested by the parent. There could be an advocate or an outside person present, the service coordinator, the EI providers who conducted the evaluation and assessment, and or providers that are providing the intervention. Meetings are held at times that are convenient to the family and in their native language, so unless it's not feasible to do so. But the IFSP will contain the team's recommendations for service delivery, so you want to make sure that you check the IFSP for the accuracy in terms of your discipline, intensity, frequency, location. And the authorizations should match what the team's recommendations are listed on the IFSP. If there are any errors, you should be contacting the service coordinator. The next piece is talking about functional outcomes. And this is what we develop as a team for the IFSP. And this is capturing, what are the family's priorities and concerns. And as a team, and as we ask the family, what are your concerns, what are your priorities, the functional outcomes are in the family's words. And it describes changes that are likely achievable in the next 6 to 12 months. The key word here is functional. We want to reflect real life contact settings, routines, what's important, to the family and making the most impact. They integrate developmental domains and are discipline free. And we want to be sure that the outcomes are addressed in the context of the child's natural environment. Again, the natural environment is the law and the aim within early intervention, and that is where we should be focusing. The number of functional outcomes that are developed on the IFSP depends on the priorities of the family, what they want to address most immediately. And they should be reasonable and shouldn't be overwhelming to the family. Again, it's a team process and should be worded in a way that's understandable to the family as well as the other team members. You can find the natural environments worksheets in the attachments. So child outcomes, we should all be very familiar with these. But I want to stress how important this information is and how valuable it is. Illinois has established an early childhood outcomes, and it's an accountability system which enables the lead agency to monitor children's development in order to support effective intervention, demonstrate system impact, and inform decisions about program improvement. The 3 outcomes are reported to the Office of Special Education on an annual basis and demonstrate how well the early intervention program is promoting children's development in the 3 areas: positive social relationships, taking appropriate action to meet needs, acquiring and using knowledge and skills. So as a reminder, these 3 outcomes are valued for all children. For a while now, we haven't had a lot of guidance, and the CFC manual will now have updated information as well as this Provider Handbook as well. It's really a renewed effort to support teams having meaningful discussions around child outcomes. We encourage you to review and understand how you can impact and effectively contribute as an equal team member. There's some nice information within the handbook that you should look at on the chart on page 39. It gives examples of preparing for the IFSP and the meeting, and again, this should include all team members, including the families, and should happen within the context of the IFSP meeting. You may see many of the CFCs adjusting the way that these conversations are facilitated to discuss the levels of development and incorporating the child outcome summaries.
Shauna, excuse me again, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to take a minute to clarify a few things that came up related to this section. So one, just a clarification on natural environments. I saw some communication on that. Natural environments is a legal requirement, so it is a legal requirement. It is also a team decision. So as I put in the chat, to the maximum extent possible, children and families should be receiving their supports and services in environments that are considered natural or typical for their same age peers without a disability or an identified delay. There are exceptions, and so in the event that the team comes to the decision that services have to be provided in an environment that is considered non-natural, it's only when early intervention cannot be achieved satisfactorily in a natural environment. So there has been a lot of questions about, can it be because of scheduling, or can it be because the family doesn't want it in their home? There's a lot of guidance from the federal level on this, so it really is a decision that is made by the team, but only in the instances where intervention cannot be achieved satisfactorily in a natural environment. So I just wanted to provide that clarification here. The second bit of clarification that I wanted to provide was around the 14 days. I have gotten some private chats and also some questions in the large chat room about this. So I thought I would just stop before we moved on. So the rule around the 14 calendar days is around reporting. So when early interventionists receive a request to do an evaluation or an assessment, they are being asked that evaluation or assessment is performed within 14 calendar days. And that includes doing the evaluation and assessment, as well as providing the written report back to the service coordinator. in the event that you know, the child gets sick or there was some cancellation or something like that, there is a little bit of leeway in that if, say, you have to do your evaluation on the 13th day of your authorization, you do have 4 business days from the date of your actual service to get the report in. But the intent behind this reporting piece is that we are, as providers, working as diligently as possible to complete the evaluations and assessments and get the written reports back to the service coordinators so that they can be used for planning purposes. So I hope that helps to clarify. Okay, Shauna, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So Chapter 5 also discusses 5.5, the developmental justification of need. So when there is discussion or recommendations to make changes to the location, the intensity, or the frequency of services, this form is required. It is located within the attachments, and there's definitely guidance here in terms of completing this form. So be sure to take a look at that. The IFSP development activities. This is very much helpful and useful as in the prior handbook. It describes IFSP development activities that are eligible for billing or billable activities, whereas before there was a list of non-billable activities, but now it includes more specifics around those billable activities. So what it looks like, what it doesn't look like. There's a nice chart on page 42 of the handbook that you definitely want to take a look at. It provides examples of appropriate use of IFSP development time. You want to review and understand how to document and bill accordingly. So examples are teaming when you are provider to provider. That's an appropriate use of IFSP development time, as well as meeting attendance and report writing. And don't forget that the social emotional consultants and the parent liaison at the CFC are part of the CFC and can be considered part of that provider to provider consultation. So just take a look at that.
Shauna, I just wanted to make a comment here, just for one brief second. I've gotten some questions about how questions will be answered, because as you guys can see, there's tons of questions coming in on the chat box, and I know that we won't be able to answer them all individually. Here, we want to provide you guys with as much information as possible today, but as we said, we'll make sure that we collect all the questions that are here, plus all the questions that are being submitted to the discussion board, but we really encourage you to use the discussion board as the place for questions because they're categorized. So you can also see what questions have already been asked. I recognize that some of you have firewalls or other things that prevent you from accessing that, and so I understand that. The way we'll handle questions is we will be offering another webinar in January, just based on the needs here that I'm seeing. And one of the things that we will do is we will incorporate as many of the answers as possible within that webinar. So we'll do that. I cannot speak to if there's going to be anything formal that comes out with questions answered, but I do know that DHS realizes that there may be some pieces of the handbook that may need further clarification, so I know that that's going to be another avenue. So I just wanted to say that before we moved on. Thanks, Shauna.
Thank you. So again, there are additional trainings to support some of the aforementioned areas that we've discussed, and we encourage you to consider these trainings for further support. Moving ahead, Chapter 6 talks about billing guidelines and use of insurance. So there's billing information, much more detailed in terms of some guidelines, billing information for providers. There's clarification and updates on transportation billing forms and instructions, There's billing tips for interpreters, translators, and interpreters of the deaf. Also about electronic billing. There are a section on describing non-billable activities. But it's also important that, you know, as a provider and as a EI payee, you're required to bill the central billing office for reimbursement, and you should be looking at the central billing office and getting the handbook there for more details and understanding all of that. We are in some instances, we are required to access a family's private insurance, and the private insurance use is determined through discussion between the service coordinator and the family. Authorization will indicate whether that is necessary, so you should be checking that authorization and understanding whether you're required to bill insurance or not. As a provider, you receive insurance information for verification and billing purposes. In some instances, there are exemptions and waivers, and you need to understand what is applicable in those situations and review that chapter, again, utilizing the central billing information found on their website. I did want to make a note about the updated language regarding provider claim summaries, and for everyone to understand that provider claim summaries are distributed only to the payee by the central billing office. If the payee needs to send it elsewhere, it is that payee's responsibility to do so. Again, be sure and visit the billing information for providers on the central billing office website. So provider responsibilities in terms of billing, where it's expected that the family check and confirm their coverage of their insurance plan and inform the service coordinator of any changes. It's also imperative that the provider verify benefits and understand coverage. And while the CFC does conduct a benefits verification, it's up to the provider to check the insurance, understand the billing plans, billing itself, coding, and procedures, and as well as the timelines and other insurance requirements. And EITP does have an Illinois EI billing insurance online training available for further assistance. So EI services, chapters 7 through 22, you know, these chapters serve as an introduction to the service descriptions, the billing codes, the rates, and it's a high-level overview of the described services that are available through early intervention. It's really helpful for you to understand your various responsibilities within the early intervention system and recognize that, you know, you may work in other settings where your responsibilities differ. So be sure to take a look at those sections that are applicable to you. Chapter 7 outlines assistive technology. There's defines assistive technology, the components of AT evaluations, who conducts those evaluations, provides pricing information, includes the procedure for eyeglasses, and the AT Developmental Evaluation of Necessity report format is coming soon. Just wanted to update you guys on that. So take a look at Chapter 7. There's quite a bit of information on assistive technology. Chapter 8, so if you are an audiologist, a licensed SLP, or a DTH providing oral rehab, you're going to want to review this section. There's new sections on testing notes and billing notes and updated language. For developmental therapy, Chapter 9. There will be a change made in the handbook. It currently says that DTH and DTB require a prescription for services, and I indicated this earlier, that that is not the case, that you do not have to have a prescription for services for DT, DTH, DTB, and that will be made in an upcoming revision. The other thing I want to draw attention to is the fact that the DTH and DTVs can do global evaluations, and there's updated information about how the authorizations will be provided. For example, the DTH may be asked to do the global and the oral rehab evaluation. The DTH will receive an evaluation auth for the global and an AR assessment auth for the oral rehab. So two different auths, one for the global, which is an evaluation, and then the assessment auth for the AR. Be sure and take a look at those sections. Chapter 11, the interpretation and translation services, is just a little different. There's a new title. It was formerly the family training and support. There's services defined, and then billable activities and procedures codes. This section is just expanded. As far as the medical services, same thing, expanded, more information than previously. So you want to make sure you take a look at the service descriptions. There's some exclusions included, updated qualifications and licensure information, and again, billable activities and procedure codes. Chapter 13, nursing. This is a change. Nursing no longer authorized to do global evaluations, but it does still include assessment, IFSP development, and direct service activities. The next chapter is, that I wanted to highlight, Chapter 20 in speech language pathology. This section reflects the updated CPT codes that happened in 2014, so you'll note that in this section, so take a look. Chapter 21, transportation, clarifications again made in each section regarding qualified staff, billable activities, and procedure codes with billing notes. So if this is applicable to you, be sure and check it out. And just like we talked about the DTH, the DTB, same thing. The DTB will get two different authorizations. If they're being asked to do the evaluation for the global, it would be an evaluation authorization. If they're asked to also do the vision assessment, then it's an assessment auth for vision. And just to clarify again, no prescription is required for the evaluation or treatment for this service. Take a look at that section.
Shauna, if I could just jump in here really quick to clarify something. Few questions that have come up about this. Regarding the DTHs and DTVs, so as Shauna said, you know, the DTHs, if they're asked to do the global, and the specialized assessment. So for DTHs, that would be a global and an AR. For DTVs, it would be the global and the specialized vision. You would be getting two auths. That is specified in each of the sections under audiology and oral rehab, and then under the chapter on vision, it's specified there. There is no guidance right now on the amount of time that needs to be given for both of those authorizations. If you are asked to do the global and the specialized assessment, you wouldn't write two separate reports. You would combine your information into one report. So you would have one, you know, demographic information, one social history, medical history, etc. And then your results section would have results of multiple evaluation or assessment tools that you have utilized to get your results. So you can submit one report for that. The other question was around, is this required or is this an option? The way that it is written in the Provider Handbook is that it is really seen as best practice to have someone with the specialized skills to do the global assessment when there is hearing loss or vision loss involved. And so it is strongly encouraged within the Provider Handbook. I think those were the couple questions around that. And yes, I'm sorry, I cannot provide any guidance right now on the amount of time for each off. I apologize about that, but I think that is still a work in progress, and it will likely be individualized based on the needs of the child and the types of tools the provider is using. Thanks, Shauna.
Okay, no problem. So moving along, there's an updated glossary and abbreviation section, and this is very much enhanced to include detailed definitions. So take a look at an example of the EA authorization. It gives a specific definition and will help clarify that particular authorization and many other definitions that are included. The co-treatment definition is clarified. So as an example, co-treatment could be included as a possible strategy to support functional outcomes written in the IFSP and must be discussed with a family before utilization. Co-treatment must be based upon a child's or family's needs and not provider logistics. So it gives specifics and an example of, for instance, the SLP and the developmental therapist would each receive individual authorizations to provide services at a home or for the child and the family together during their designated time. So just an example, clinical opinion is updated. All of these have been enriched or enhanced in some way. We already discussed the IFSP development time and giving some specific examples for you, billable versus non-billable activities. And the makeup sessions are clearly defined, so be sure and take a look at how you conduct makeup sessions and how it pertains to billing, and the abbreviations as well are identified. We have a lot of jargon, so it's very helpful to look at this section. And then the attachment sections, I mentioned earlier the AT developmental evaluation of necessity will be coming soon. I also mentioned that there are now discharge report formats and guidance available, as well as the 6-month summary report format and guidance, and then the medical diagnostic, and then the one we've already been using, the evaluation and assessment report format. And there are a few minor modifications, so you want to be sure and download that new format. It clarifies the difference between the EA and the AS authorizations. So these are found on the Provider Connections website, so be sure and check those out. And just remember that, with these formats, and we are responsible for documenting progress toward outcomes, and you want to be sure you understand and the guidance pertaining to each of these formats. Additional attachments include the developmental justification that I mentioned, to changing of frequency, intensity, location of services. A sample IFSP is included. Number 7, it's in English and Spanish, so definitely take a look at that. Susan talked about this earlier in terms of what is the family really consenting to, and you'll notice the statement, I consent to the written and verbal exchange of the members of the IFSP team, so there's no need to get additional consent. So that's a welcome change there. And that is only the members on the IFSP team. So additional attachments include overview of the early intervention referral to transition. So that's a nice snapshot to take a look at and get, and just re-familiarize yourself. And then sample authorizations with descriptions is also included in the handbook. It's a nice guidance tool. So be sure and take a look at all the attachments that are now in the new handbook. So what's next? So know your responsibilities as an EI provider. We've talked about a lot. And this handbook is truly a tool and a guidance document and really a first place to go if you have questions. We want all providers to understand and adhere to the principles of early intervention and best practice. And again, use this as the first line resource for any questions. And as a provider, you should be staying current and looking for updates on a consistent basis. And remember that there are so many resources out there with our EI partners. Be very familiar with the websites you can go to. But as Susan said, with all of the questions, we will be offering the second webinar in January. So we look forward to looking through those questions and answering as much as possible.
Shauna, I wanted to just pause for a second and make a couple comments. So there was a question about hard copies of the Provider Handbook, and are those available? They are not. The handbook is online, and it's really the responsibility of the individual providers and payees to make sure that they have the newest Provider Handbook. And currently, Provider Connections is housing the most updated, revised version of it. So that is the website that I would visit. And I apologize if there was a miscommunication. DTH and audiology oral rehab were being used interchangeably, I guess. So audiology and oral rehab, you'll note, is the service. That is the chapter in here. DTH is one of the qualified personnel who can provide that service. So I just wanted to say that. There was a comment about, we had mentioned that there were updated CPT codes for speech language pathologists. Yes, there are updated CPT codes for PT and OT. Currently, the Bureau of Early Intervention is working with HFS to determine how to move forward with the the coding for early intervention. There are some differences in the way that the codes read in terms of units of service, so it's kind of a work in progress and a discussion that's happening. And those were the only things that I wanted to comment on now. So thanks, Shauna.
All right, I want to thank everyone for participating today. It's been full of a lot of good information, and as always, there's questions. So we will definitely do our best to make sure that your questions get transferred over into the discussion forum and with responses. If you have any other questions, please go there. Alyssa has posted the link one more time, and there are instructions within that link. Also, Alyssa has posted those as well on how to get into the discussion forum. It is a fluid document, a fluid forum, so as new questions come in, we will update responses as we can. You've given folks lots of things to think about, so it looks like Susan has one more thing she'd like to say.
I'm sorry, Maria, I didn't know how to get your attention without talking over you. So I raised my hand. Thank you. I do want to just thank everyone for being here today. I know it's a Friday afternoon. I know you took your time away from your administrative duties or working with families, so I appreciate your time. One of the things that we did want to make sure to let you know is that we will definitely be offering another time to clarify questions. We will use the questions that are submitted through the discussion board to guide that. So again, we encourage you, if you have specific questions, to put them there. The Bureau wanted also to just let us all know that they are working to clarify any questions or things that are currently unclear in the Provider Handbook, and we'll do our best to do that prior to February 1st, which is the full implementation date for the Provider Handbook. they recognize and we recognize that anytime something like this gets put out, there's always going to be clarifications needed. So it's just something that they really wanted to let you know. If you guys need support with accessing the forum, you can always reach out to the training program. We're happy to help you, but the discussion board forum instructions are there. So if you follow that link, the forum is there and the instructions are there for you. So thanks. Sorry, Maria, go ahead.
No problem.